Hi, welcome to the maiden voyage of the U.S. Task Force on National and Homeland Security YouTube channel. I'm going to be your host today, Jonathan Hollerman. With us, we've got David Pyne, who's a national security strategist. He is the Deputy Director of National Operations at the EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security. He is also the editor and author of the Real War newsletter. And if you don't get that, make sure you subscribe to that. We'll have a link down below in the description here. And also, he recently co-authored a book alongside Peter Pry and the late Peter Pry and Cindy Ayers. It's called Catastrophe Now. It is America's last chance to prevent an EMP disaster. So first off, David, thanks a lot for coming on the show. And, go ahead and just open up and tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So Catastrophe Now is America's last chance to prevent an EMP disaster. We just published the book in late March, went on Amazon on March 28th. And the book is really, it was a project that, Dr. Pry really, our late courageous visionary leader of the EMP Task Force, longtime executive director and co-founder, really, wanted us to get published even after his unfortunate and untimely death. In that, it was a warning to America to really save our country from an impending EMP disaster. A lot of people don't realize the existential threat that super EMP weapons that Russia, North Korea, and China possess, and we don't, pose to the United States of America. EMP attack could destroy, could kill 90% of Americans. That's about 275 million Americans. I think there are very few Americans that realize, that really can comprehend that scale of disaster. I mean, essentially would be genocide on a massive scale of the American people. And it would leave us defenseless to follow on attacks and even invasion and partial occupation of our great country would cause us to collapse. And our military would melt away, essentially. But this book also has, some really interesting, I think, and useful real world solutions to get us out of the problem that we're facing. Where we have this undersized nuclear deterrent, which was built essentially during the Reagan years and even before, as far back as the Kennedy years and maybe even Eisenhower. And that we've been trying to modernize, but we're beyond. We're falling behind modernization schedule, and we're actually modernizing to a smaller, less capable nuclear force. So this unilateral disarmament continues that we've been forced to live under since the end of the Cold War, beginning with President George H.W. Bush. But it also has solutions about foreign policy and the national security dilemmas we face with Russia and China, if you'd like to discuss that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get into that. It was a big eye-opening. I mean, I've been following the EMP threat. I'm an analytical guy. So like when I first learned of this 15 years ago, whenever it was, around 2008, I think is when I first kind of came on the subject of EMP. I don't trust what I hear through the media and a lot of times. So I want to research. And so, I download all the government reports and the EMP commission reports all the way up to 2017, all the reports they put out. And Dr. Pry was a big factor in a lot of that. And I've just read everything I get my hands on. And it's fascinating to me how ignorant the American people are. And I would even go as the government politicians are to how serious this threat is. And if an EMP or a solar flare or cyber attack that takes down our national electric grid, I mean, what the serious ramifications are to our country. And you mentioned 90% of Americans dying. That's 270 million people dying over the course of the first year. Starvation, disease, sickness. It'd be terrible. But it's hard to put that into words and explain that to people in ways that they understand. I mean, I've tried through some of my fiction books and some of my writings, but at the end of the day, unless the politicians start taking this threat seriously, we're in for a world of hurt as a country and as a nation. And we've been in the same meetings. I'm part of the Electromagnetic Defense Task Force, Secure the Grid Coalition. I've sat in a lot of kind of high level meetings. I've met with many politicians. I was in Texas with Senator Bob Hall here recently, trying to get legislation in Texas for the Texas Grid passed. And it's just fascinating to me how like this isn't even a blip on anybody's radar, and it's kind of a end of civilization event for this country if we don't take it serious. So, I know there are solutions. Catastrophe Now, which is a great book. I recommend everybody buy that book and look at it, and some solutions and stuff are provided in there. But at the end of the day, we need people's support to write their congressman, senator, and we need to get the politicians to get off their rear end, stop taking money from the electric utility companies, and actually get something done to harden the grid. It's been frustrating to watch the last 4 years.
Yeah, it's a tremendous dereliction of duty on the part of U.S. Leaders and policymakers. President Trump was the only president in U.S. history that's actually, taken affirmative action to try to protect our country against EMP attack. Unfortunately, our efforts to fund grid hardening in Congress have fallen short. In 2010, the Pelosi House of Representatives at the time was led by the Democrats, passed the Grid Act unanimously, and then it was killed by Lisa Murkowski in the Senate Energy Committee. And then we had the SHIELD Act in 2013, and that never got out of committee. 2017, the SEPA, Critical Infrastructure Protection Act, did pass, and it implemented some of our recommendations, but the most critical, which was funding the hardening of the grid, has never been passed. And so, barring a presidential declaration of emergency, as we saw with the Trump do with the border wall, we have to have Congress fund the hardening of the grid. And the cost we estimate currently is about $50 billion. It would be a one-time investment that would harden against three different threats: super EMP attack by Russia, China, North Korea, perhaps even Iran, which Peter and I assess is already a nuclear power, and then super geomagnetic storms. The threat from the sun that's naturally occurring, as occurred with the Carrington event in 1859. And we're overdue for really a world-ending super geomagnetic storm. And that fits right in with I think the climate change agenda, in which we're kind of spending trillions of dollars to fight what I believe is kind of an imaginary threat, the man-made climate change issue, which I think is only 2% man-made and 98% naturally occurring. But if there's something to save our country from, that would be it, because it's going to happen. It's not a question of if, but when. And it's more likely to occur sooner than later in our lifetimes. And then finally, the existential threat of a massive cyber attack. We can harden the grid and eventually other critical infrastructure as well against those three threats, and do it in a very affordable way. That's a small percentage of our annual defense budget.
Yeah, Joe Weiss just had a recent paper out here on the cyber threat and with SCADA equipment, and he's somebody that I've talked to in the past, and he's very knowledgeable on this. So the cyber threat is, again, people are aware of the cyber threat, but like to a degree, like they don't understand the full ramifications of losing the electric grid, taking down power grids, and what that would mean for the American people, because every aspect of human life revolves around it. But to kind of get back to the threats, let's talk about Russia and China, some of the things that are going on in the world. I stopped watching the news here a couple of years ago, the mainstream news. It was just so obvious that on both sides, they're so agenda driven. I regularly say on my podcast that I believe we live in a post-truth world. It's hard to know what's true and what's not. You look at ChatGPT, you look at some of the artificial intelligence stuff that's coming, and it's where is it all heading 5 years from now? It's kind of a scary thought, but it's really hard to decipher what's going on and what's not. And same thing with the Russia-Ukraine situation. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, New York Times, even like left-leaning papers, were putting out serious hit pieces on the Zelensky administration and Ukraine, and now they're like the favored child, right? They're this wonderful country. They, you know, so I guess my point is that like there's always more going on behind the scenes, and when the media report, they have a narrative and they just report it one way, and you don't get to see, you know, most American people have no idea how this whole situation transpired for over the last couple of years to get us to where we're at today. But that is a long conversation for another time that, you know, I know would love to have you back on and talk some more about it. But what do you think are the solutions to get out of this mess with Ukraine and Russia?
Yeah, first of all, following up on your point, you know, it's been said that truth is the first casualty of war. And, you know, we've seen that in all of our really 20th century wars and of course, more recent wars, beginning with the First World War. You know, the truth is, you know, censored. You know, people who tell the truth are censored, sometimes even imprisoned and, you know, threatened with the Sedition Act. You know, the Biden administration has really, you know, it kind of issues its propaganda points, and then the mainstream media, the liberal media, you know, essentially takes those talking points and then tries to, you know, parrot them with in an uncritical way. And you know, as you mentioned, the most important solution, I mean, the motto of the Washington Post newspaper is "Democracy dies in darkness," and what that means is, you know, it's critical that the American people have, you know, we have an informed electorate to preserve our constitutional republic, and unfortunately, we don't have that. And you know, we see that you know, it's essentially the U.S. government has you know, been waging information warfare and perception management campaigns. That's something we you know, they tell us that Russia and China are waging against us, but the sad truth is, they're waging against the American people as well. And so we need to, you know, be able to see through, you know, to have independent media sources to determine what's really going on. And sometimes, you know, sometimes it, you know, you have to go to international media to really understand what's happening. And certainly
Or at least get a different perspective, because the mainstream media, it's like an echo chamber. They're all saying the same thing. To
right.
get any kind of outside, I agree with you. Sometimes you do have to go to, you know, even foreign media sources, like you said, to say, okay, well, there's some pieces of the puzzle here that our media left out, which is frustrating. What do you think the solution is for the president that's coming in, whether that be Biden, Trump, DeSantis, or whoever else ends up getting the reins here? How do we get out of this mess in Russia and Ukraine and all this money we're giving them?
You know, the solution is ridiculously simple. It's, you know, I've published two major peace proposals in the pages of the National Interest. The first one was in June, and, you know, I got a lot of coverage on that one, a lot of international media, both for and against. And it was a 15-point peace plan, and it was a realistic peace plan. It was, you know, it was one that focused on a peace that would be acceptable to both Russia and Ukraine, because, you know, we have so many U.S. you know, quote unquote national security experts, you know, come up with these pie in the sky peace plans that essentially amount to unconditional surrender for the Russian Federation. And Russia is the mightiest, you know, they're the premier nuclear superpower on the planet. Granted, their economy, they're only the sixth ranked in the world in terms of PPP, purchase power parity, and I think eighth ranked in pure dollar terms. But they have a world-class military, and they've been holding back their most, you know, greatest military capabilities in you know, unconventional weapons such as cyber, EMP, and of course, you know, theater and tactical and strategic nuclear weapons, which they well exceed the U.S. Both in terms of quantity and quality by a massive amount. You know, tactical nuclear weapons, they have 35 times more. But then more recently, on October 1st, I published a ceasefire plan, which essentially was kind of the Korean model. You know, we had this, a lot of people don't realize the Korean War never formally ended. You know, we had an armistice agreement that ended hostilities and has been in place for 70 years and has kept the peace for 7 decades. But we remain technically at war with both China and North Korea. And the Trump administration was talking about a peace agreement that would end that. But essentially, what it would be is it would freeze the conflict along the current line of control, and then there'd be exchange of POWs. There would be negotiations for a permanent peace plan. There'd be no reparations. There'd be no trials for war criminals, except in their own countries. And there'd be a decrease in sanctions. Russian food and fuel shipments, which have very negatively affected other countries, including our own economy. Those sanctions would be lifted. There'd be some consideration perhaps for other sanctions as well, providing Russian compliance for the agreement. But we'd have kind of a demilitarized zone, perhaps 4 kilometer wide, just as 4 kilometers wide, just as we have in Korea, and that would be policed by OSCE, perhaps UN troops from neutral powers. And I think that would, along with the promise to essentially, Ukraine would never join NATO as long as Russia, materially complied with the terms of the agreement. I think that would completely resolve the issue. It would end the conflict. It would stop the death and destruction in Ukraine. It will allow us to rebuild, help rebuild Ukraine. So it'd be very beneficial. I think in many ways it could be said it would be more beneficial for Ukraine even than Russia. It would provide Ukraine with continued control of 88% of its pre-war controlled territory that would be secure and independent and with its neutrality and security guaranteed by the UN Security Council members of primarily, of course, the U.S., Britain, and France. Obviously, Russia and China would not be very, very supportive of Ukraine, or couldn't be counted on. Russia, of course, being the invader in this situation.
Right. So just to play devil's advocate, because I think again everyone's on the Ukraine bandwagon. You can see in everybody's social medias, the accounts, they got the Ukrainian flag. We stand with Ukraine and everything like that. A lot of people would say, well, it's not fair. That they would have to give up any territory. It's not fair. That we want war crimes hearings. We want this and that. That's the narrative that you're seeing from the other side of the equation and the aisle there. The idea that Zelensky, will never release one little territory, one section of the country, which was predominantly Russian to begin with, but or had predominantly Russian interests. So it seems to me that we're almost being forced into a war with Russia. I don't want to put narrative or motive by anyone, but it just seems like the world's pushing us, these two superpowers to go at it. And there's not, like nobody's wanting to step back and have reasonable negotiations to end this conflict. And my concern is, and what I've been warning a lot of my subscribers, the people that follow me, is like, since the beginning of this conflict, I've said I'm not really watching what's happening in Ukraine. I'm watching what's happening in Moscow. If we start seeing massive infrastructure blow up in Moscow, if we start seeing massive cyber attacks in Moscow, they're going to attribute that to the help we're giving Ukraine, both with our cyber warfare teams that are over in Ukraine today and all the weapons and stuff. So I know that we're giving Ukraine like these little tags on these missiles we're giving them. Don't use this in Russia. I know we're telling them that, but I'm just waiting for something to go south or something big to happen in Russia. And I think, there was I forget the advisor to Putin here. It was before the war started, but she talked about when Ukraine war happens, she predicted that something's going to happen in Moscow, and then Moscow's going to retaliate to a city in the U.S., and then it's going to go tit for tat, And she I think she dropped the phrase talking about using EMP as the ultimate hit, which I don't want to go that far, but that's my concern, is this thing escalating and not going the other direction.
Yeah, I mean, to follow up on your point, the war in Ukraine is a manufactured crisis. It was completely avoidable. It was deliberately chosen by President Biden. Putin had made clear that his minimal requirement for not invading was a U.S. and NATO guarantee that Ukraine would never join NATO. And that was something we could have given at zero costs to ourselves. because the hidden secret, essentially, the unspoken secret, is that there's no chance that Ukraine will ever join NATO. It's always been a straw man argument. It's an issue that we've threatened Russia with, that's caused this invasion, but it's something that's never been achievable. And there's many reasons for that we probably don't have time to get into. But chief of which, of course, is France and Germany have made clear that they would never agree to that. There was a question recently at the CNN town hall with President Trump, in which he was asked, essentially, do you support Ukraine winning the war? And he didn't answer the question. He gave a decent answer. It wasn't great, but it was a much better answer than we could expect from a lot of neoconservative Republicans and, of course, liberal internationalist Democrats. But it essentially, what the answer should have been is that, I don't want to do what's best for another country, for Ukraine. I want to do what's best for America. What we need to do, to support a solution that's a win for America's national security interests. And, we see this mistake over and over again, in which, we're essentially intimidated by the media and by U.S. leaders and supporters of the war in Ukraine, in which we're told we have to conflate Ukraine's national interests with our own, and they're very oppositional. Ukraine's national interest, according to Zelensky, is to retake Crimea, and Russia has stated in no uncertain terms that's a nuclear red line, which essentially would increase the chances of a nuclear escalation by Russia to over 90%. As former Assistant Secretary of Defense Gray Mallison, who himself is a former Biden National Security Advisor to his campaign, has stated. And so, what we need to do is what my congressman has stated, Congressman Chris Stewart, in a recent interview with Glenn Beck back in January. And that's, we need to start putting America's national security interests first in the war. And that would be to end the conflict as quickly as possible, because as Dr. Pry stated last year, the only vital national security interest that the U.S. has in Ukraine is to avoid a great power war with Russia and China that would almost invariably escalate to the nuclear and EMP level.
Yeah, it seems like the more, and when I talked to Peter Pry even before the Ukrainian conflicts kicked off, I mean, his stance was always like, we're poking the bear with Russia. It's like Russia's tried to come to the table for 20 years and be a world player and on the economic front and the kind of the social front. But it's just like, since the Cold War, we've just enjoyed having them in that position and just keep poking them. And especially with this latest situation with Ukraine, the more we keep funding this war in Ukraine and the putting the missile base over there, or the submarine base that we're putting over there, and there's just so many things we're doing to antagonize them instead of trying to get out of this situation. And my other big concern is that we're going to push Russia into the waiting arms of China. So I know they've had their socioeconomic issues in the past, but we're watching them joining with Brazil and was it Turkey and a bunch of other nations as far as financial and oil trading, and we're basically, it's almost like we're watching the Axis and the Axis and the Allied powers forming on the horizon right now, and it's kind of concerning. So if you want to talk to that and kind of where do you think? I guess the big question. We'll jump into China. Where do you think this China-Taiwan situation? My kind of prediction was 6 months ago that I think when Russia went into Ukraine, that China was going to use that opportunity to kind of go into Taiwan, because, the world's not going to fight two superpowers at the same time, right? What are your thoughts on that as far as the Taiwan situation and when we can expect that to escalate? If it looks like Trump's going to win, I would assume they would go in beforehand. I don't know. I'm just speculating. You're the national security analyst, so I'll let you respond.
Yeah, so I've been warning since 2000 that the greatest existential threat the U.S. would face in the 21st century would be the Sino-Russian alliance. And 7 months after I made that statement as part of my oral thesis at Georgetown in my national security studies program for my master's degree, that materialized into a formal alliance. So Russia and China have been formal allies since July of 2001. So this it's not a new development, but certainly the war in Ukraine has. I mean, the biggest winner by far has been China. Not only, as you mentioned, as you alluded to, Biden has been massively drawing down our weapon stocks and ammo stocks to a really inexcusable extent, I think, that has made the U.S. military incapable or far less capable of fighting, let alone winning, a great power war against either Russia or China, very possibly both, of course, because, as I mentioned, they're allies and they would likely fight together in a direct war against the U.S. If we were to, attack Russia directly in Eastern Europe, China would likely join the war on the Russian side, and vice versa. If we were to, fight China directly over Taiwan, Russia would likely engage in joint military operations and perhaps even amphibious invasions against U.S. territory, Alaska and Hawaii, but certainly Japan and U.S. allies. So the threat we're facing is existential, and it's just so frustrating to see our members of Congress really not focus on the security issues. It's almost like they don't even see the threat. I mean, aside from a few members of the Armed Services Committees and some hearings that I watched, and even more distressingly, it's the U.S. declared official policy is not to defend against either Russian or Chinese nuclear missile attacks. So really, the American people are completely defenseless against Russian and Chinese nuclear EMP, and to a large extent, massive cyber attack as well. But in terms of the timing of China's planned invasion of Taiwan, I do think it's increasingly imminent. It's most likely will not occur until next year. But as you mentioned, a lot of people, including my friend J.R. Nyquist, in a recent discussion I had with him in a meeting just I believe it was yesterday. He talked about how he thought that that China would not invade Taiwan so long as the war in Ukraine was being fought. And I think it's exactly the opposite. I think the war in Ukraine provides China a window of vulnerability where the U.S. has invested. We're not fighting Russia directly, but we've certainly expanded our military footprint, both in terms of air, naval, and ground, especially ground forces in Eastern Europe, to counter what's perceived as a Russian threat to NATO. And that's left us weaker, with less military resources to send to the Far East. Now, of course, I side with President Trump, who reportedly stated in John Bolton's book quoted in John Bolton's book as president, that he stated that because Taiwan was 100 miles away from China and 8,000 miles away from the U.S., actually less than that, 81 miles from China at its closest point, that the U.S., there was no way that U.S. could defend Taiwan. I think that's an accurate assessment. China has built up military capabilities that we really haven't seen an adversary do in terms of amphibious capabilities, as well as nuclear, dual capable nuclear missiles. As I report in Catastrophe Now, they have I think it was 4,170 estimated nuclear capable ballistic missiles of all ranges, including short range and anti-ship missiles, and then at least 500 cruise missiles on top of that. So, they have absolute nuclear, theater nuclear supremacy over the U.S. The U.S. has zero nuclear weapons stationed in the Far East, the Western Pacific. We do have potentially tactical warheads that we could deploy on our Ohio-class nuclear missile submarines, but only 8 to 32 in total that Trump reportedly built. So, and any nuclear missile launch from an Ohio nuclear missile submarine that was aimed in the Chinese direction would be automatically considered a strategic nuclear first strike. So it was really a foolish program that I opposed to the hilt, but unfortunately Trump did deploy that. If that's the response that we give to even a very limited Chinese nuclear escalation in the Far East in a Taiwan war situation, that would quickly escalate to a full-scale nuclear exchange that the U.S. likely would not survive.
There's a lot of ramifications. I mean, Taiwan. I mean, all the superconductor, all the chips come from Taiwan right now. I know we're building a couple places in I think Texas, and there's two microchip facilities being built, but they're building older microchips. They're not building the latest and state of the art stuff. So I mean, that would put us at a pretty bad footing if China got a hold of Taiwan. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, 60% of overall, semiconductor chips are built in Taiwan, but 90% of advanced microchips. So, that's certainly a strategic concern. I mean, Taiwan, unlike Ukraine, is a longtime ally. It's not a treaty ally. Hasn't been a treaty ally since 1979. We don't have any defense, security commitments with them, even though we've sent 200 U.S. troops to be essentially a nuclear tripwire. I think to try to help ensure that we would actually have to fight that war, a war that's unwinnable in my estimation, and we should never ever fight unwinnable wars. So let's take that to the worst case scenario. So Chris Stewart, again, my congressman, has stated he stated on Fox News fairly recently that according to a recent study, we'd lose up to 8%, 8 or even 9% of our GDP. That would be kind of a depression statistic in 1 year to go down 8%. But what's the alternative? The alternative is, I guess in a best case scenario, we fight China and Taiwan. We're unsuccessful in defending Taiwan, but we have some kind of EMP or nuclear exchange. Perhaps we even destroy China, and the U.S. is destroyed as well. Essentially we lose 100% of our economy. So, and 475 million Americans as well. So, it's all relative. We have to be rational. We have to be realists. We haven't had realist foreign policy presidents since George H.W. Bush. Other than President Trump. President Trump was a very notable exception. He thought in very realist terms, and he tried to implement a realist policy of peace with Russia that I think would have been really successful and certainly would have avoided this unfortunate war in Ukraine. But we have to do what's best for America, and the number one priority must be to defend, preserve, and protect the United States of America and its over 300 million citizens. Not counting, the non-citizens in our country, which number 26 to 30 million, I think. And if we're not doing that,
then more. I mean, I don't think we have a shot of protecting Taiwan from China. I mean, it's kind of almost ludicrous with the distance, and I would even say the technology that China's starting to play with. We haven't been modernizing our army like China has and Russia, and I don't know what the alternative is, right? Maybe we can fast track some semiconductor facilities here in the U.S., which we should be building our own semiconductors anyway. We should be building our own high voltage transformers anyway. We get in a war with China. I mean, 80-90% of the stuff we buy at the store comes from China. I mean, it's going to be terrible. So, there's a lot of things on the horizon that are very concerning. Hopefully we get somebody in office and these politicians can open their eyes and see that, like, U.S. has got to kind of pull back. This idea where we're messing with everybody else's country and what's going on with these other situations on the other side of the globe. I mean, we just need to keep our nose out of it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, these wars that we're facing, these existential threats of World War III with Russia, the Sino-Russian alliance, it really comes down to these overlapping spheres of influence. They have legitimate spheres of influence just like we do. We have the Monroe Doctrine, in which we assert a sphere of influence over the Western Hemisphere. But of course, our sphere of influence, we've tried to assert is much farther than that. All the way to the other side of the world, both in Europe and in Asia. And we certainly have legitimate reasons. And I would argue, we should continue to have, defense commitments certainly with Western Europe and with our treaty allies in the Pacific. And I think all of those nations are defensible from our standpoint. I don't think Russia poses, unless provoked or unless we attack them and start a war. I don't or start a war with China. I don't think they're planning on invading Europe or invading NATO countries. There's really no evidence of that. In the case of the Pacific, I mean, they certainly do have joint plans to invade U.S. Pacific allies, but only if the U.S. either provokes war with China or actually starts a war with China by defending Taiwan militarily, as the president has stated he would 4 or 5 times thus far. But you raise the issue of submarine bases, and the submarine bases that I'm most concerned about are in South Korea. The Biden administration recently had this essentially a mutual reassurance arrangement in which South Korea was saying it was considering developing nuclear weapons to counter the massive increase in North Korean nuclear weapons. And in response, the Biden administration got them to agree not to do that if the U.S. would redeploy nuclear weapons to the Korean Peninsula, which we haven't done, I think, for almost 30 years. The idea of forward deploying and stationing even briefly for port visits, our Ohio nuclear missile submarines. We only have 4 at sea at any given time, 2 in the Pacific and 2 in the Atlantic. It's very foreseeable, and this has happened a lot recently, very disturbingly, where the Biden administration has used these nuclear missile submarines for strategic signaling, to show that we mean business, but in a way that they could be annihilated with conventional hypersonic weapons. I mean, it would be very quick and easy for China to sink both of our submarines if they were in port, near Chinese territory. And the idea that the U.S. would respond with nuclear retaliation, I think, is almost non-existent. I don't think Biden, Biden's the most anti-nuclear president we've ever had. And I think that he would only use nuclear weapons if our enemies use nuclear weapons against us and perhaps our allies first. So, that's been very concerning as well.
Yep. We're getting close to the end here. Go ahead and tell us a little bit how people can find you. How you have a website, how they can sign up for your newsletter, where to find the book, etc.
Yeah, so our book, Catastrophe Now, is on sale on Amazon, and it originally, when it first came out, it was within 2 weeks it went up to #1 hot new release for national and international security books. #3 overall, so it was selling quite well. Sales have dropped since then, but the book really is a blueprint, I think, for how to save America in terms of our current national security dilemmas. So I'd encourage each one of our viewers here on the Task Force channel to take the time to buy a copy of the book and share it. Share the ideas and solutions in the book with state and federal lawmakers to try to get them to take action. My Real War newsletter is at dpyne.substack.com. We're over 3,000 subscribers as of last week, and got a lot of really important information. I think cutting edge information analysis, some of which you won't see anywhere else, including of past conflicts and wars. In which I provide potential alternate history scenarios. Essentially, if we had done things differently, we wouldn't even be facing Russia, China, and North Korea today. We might not have any enemies at all. So, I believe I'm a strong believer in learning from the lessons of history. I think if our failure to do that, especially in terms of U.S. policymakers, is really setting us up to relive the mistakes of history, and to do so in a absolutely catastrophic way that may end in the collapse and destruction of our great country.
Well, thanks a lot for coming on. To those of you watching, I'd like to see, we're probably going to have David Pyne on. I'd like to see about maybe doing this once a month. Today was kind of a catch-all. We covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time, but each month there's lots of things that come out that the American people aren't being aware of on the EMP, solar flare, the grid security front. We have our regular meetings there at the task force, and there's a lot of topics that we cover that the American people just aren't aware of. So that's kind of going to be the focus of this channel. I'm hoping to have some great people on, like Michael Mabey and Tom Popick and some others in the industry, to talk specifics about the EMP threat, EMP protection, things along those lines. But David Pyne, we definitely want to have you on again and talk more about the ramifications on foreign policy and how to stay out of this mess. So thanks a lot for coming on again.
Thank you. Let me just say one last thing, and that is, please, all of our viewers, we encourage you to go to our EMP Task Force website at emptaskforce.us and either to donate your money to us. We're a nonprofit organization, so we're a congressionally authorized board, but we don't have any a steady funding stream for our efforts to defend and protect America from EMP and other existential threats, and also to volunteer, to help staff our state leadership organizations to help make a difference as well. So thanks again for having me on the show.
Yeah, we look forward to having you on again. Thanks, David.